Welcome to another stream. Yeah, so another day of learning. I want to get started on this topic as soon as right now. So today I will be studying the response model and return type. So yeah, let me get started. I just need to make sure a few of my things are working. All right, so they're saying you can declare the type used for the response by annotating the path operation function return type. Okay, so meaning we can tell FastAPI or tell Python or tell FastAPI that this function is going to return a particular type of data. And I think previously we've not been doing that. If you look at, for example, this path operation function, it has no implementation for that. So let me go back here and continue reading. They're saying you can type and you can use type annotations the same way you would use. You can use type annotations the same way you would for input data in function parameters. You can use pandatic models, lists, dictionaries, scalar values like integers, booleans, etc. Okay, so all that I've learned before applies to this. And here is the saying Python 3.10 from FastAPI import FastAPI, the importing base model from pandatic. An instance of FastAPI, then we have here an item pandatic model. It has a name, which is a string, has a description, which is a string, or can be none. And by default, it's none. That makes it optional. We have a price, which is a float, tax, a float, or none. Default is none. Tags, which is a list, which is a list of strings. Default is an empty list. And then a path operation function, which has been annotated like this with item as the return value. So I think this is what they mean. So this one, create item, returns exactly one item, but this one here, read items, returns a list of items. Then they say return, yeah, so of course, because you're returning a list of items, you have to return a list. So you have a list with two items, the first item and then the second item. But here they only have one item. Okay, so I think they have now to explain that part. If I read here, this is for other people working in Python 3.9 plus and 3.8 plus. But I won't open that because, yeah, this is mine. So, okay, the thing FastAPI will use this return type to validate the return data. If the data is invalid, for example, you are missing a field, it means your app code is broken, not returning what it should, and it will return a server error instead of returning incorrect data. This way, you and your clients can be certain that they will receive the data and the data shape expected. Yeah, this is good. So that clients get exactly what they expect and I give them exactly what they expect instead of getting incorrect data. Yeah, so I think this is how responses are handled. Then they're saying it will add a JSON schema for the response in the OpenAPI path operation. This will be used by the automatic docs. It will also be used by automatic client code generation tools. But most importantly, it will limit and filter the output data to what is defined in the return type. This is particularly important for security. We'll see more of that below. Okay. I think I want to see how it appears in the documentation. So I'll copy all this. This is actually all very similar. What changes is simply the return type. So what was I using before? Yeah, looks it's still running. Let's restart it quickly. Then let me try to have a look. What's the endpoint? It's items. So right here, I can go to slash items, reduce this a little. Yeah, this looks okay as expected, but what I want to see is the documentation. Okay, so we have get, no parameters. Okay, this is okay. Reduce it a little and scroll. Okay, returns the list. If I close this, open here, no parameters, but there's a request body required, and they give an example value. Okay, this is fine. Then we have 200, 42. Okay, I think this is fine. I can do this. So let me continue to where I was. So response model parameter. So you're saying there are some cases where you need or want to return some data that is not exactly what the type declares. For example, you want to return a dictionary or a database object, but declare it as a Pydantic model. This way, the Pydantic model would do all the documentation, validation, among others, for the object that you returned. For example, a dictionary or database object. This is good to know. Then they're saying if you add the return type annotation, tools and editors would complain with a correct error telling you that your function is returning a type, for example, dict, that is different from what you declared, for example, a Pydantic model. In other words, the tools and editors will help us to have the correct return type. So you're saying in those cases, you can use the path operation decorator parameter response model instead of the return type. Interesting. Okay, let me read this again. If you added the return type annotations tool type annotation, if you added the return type annotation, tools and editors would complain with the correct error telling you that your function is returning a type that is different from what you declared. Okay. Something taking some time to digest this. They are saying there are some cases where you need or want to return some data that is not exactly what the type declares. Oh, okay, now I get it. So for example, maybe you want to return something else here, okay, like this. Maybe it's a string, okay, but this, here you're saying you want a list of items, but right here you're returning only a string. So when you set up linting properly, I should get an error. This should actually fail, okay? This should actually fail if I try to execute. So you're saying, for example, you want to return a dictionary or database object, but declare it as a Pydantic model. This way, the Pydantic model will do all the data documentation, validation. Okay, I get it now. So I can go back to this. They're saying you can use response model parameter in any of the path operations, up.get, .post, .put, .delete. And for this, we're using only two, post and get. So they're saying among others. So when we come here, all this is pretty much the same apart from this, any. Okay, why? Because the return type is not certain. Okay, so that's why they're using any. The return type is unknown. So now I can move on to, yes. So this is it. So they're saying response model equals to item, then the return type is any. Why? Because they're saying you're not actually sure, because you may want to return a dictionary or a database object, one of those, okay, or any other, a list of other items. Okay, this makes sense. Response model item, response model list of items. Okay, then this becomes any. Yeah, so I guess the same would apply here. If I will just have to change this, say from typing, import any. Okay, then here in the path operation decorator, I would say the response model is equals to item. Simple as that. Then this would return, instead become any. Okay, then even here I can say the response underscore model equals to a list of items. Okay, like that. And then here the return type would be any, but of course this will help us with the validation, because if we don't do this, the editor would complain. This, yeah, this kind of okay. Okay, so they're saying note that response model is a parameter of the decorator method, get, post, among others, not of your path operation function, like all parameters and body. Response model receives the same type you would declare for a pandatic model field. So it can be a pandatic model, but it can also be, for example, a list of pandatic models, like list item. Saying FastAPI will use this response model to do all the data documentation, validation, among others, and also convert and filter the output data to its type declaration. Yeah, this is good to know. So as ideally, you're using any because you're not really sure of what the exact value could be. It could be dictionary, database objects, whatever, but still you want to do validation, okay, and documentation and filtering depending on your pandatic model. So you simply have to use this, which is good. Okay, so there's a tip here saying if you have strict type checks in your editor, MyPy among others, you can declare the function return type as any, like we have seen. That way, you tell the editor that you are intentionally returning anything. But FastAPI will do the data documentation, validation, filtering, among others, with the response model. I think there should be a way to harmonize all this between people who are creating these tools and those who are, I don't know, maybe because FastAPI is relatively newer, but I feel like there should be harmony, okay? The two should be harmonized. All right, just a moment, just need to sip. Okay, so let's go on with this. So we have response model priority. If you declare both a return type and a response model, the response model will take priority and be used by FastAPI. In other words, like for example here, our return type is any, okay, but the response model here is item. So FastAPI takes this as the priority over this. Okay, so this is just for the editors not to complain. But FastAPI will do validation, filtering, whatever using this. Yeah, pretty cool. So they're saying this way you can add correct type annotations to your functions even when you are returning a type different from the response model to be used by the editor and tools like MyPy. And still you can have FastAPI do the validation, documentation, among others using. Yeah, so ideally, if you want to have peace with your editor and tools like MyPy, follow this direction. So they're saying you can also use response model equals to none to disable creating a model for that path operation. Okay, you can also use response model equals to none to disable creating a response model for that path operation. You might need to do it if you're adding type annotations for things that are not valid Pydantic fields. You will see an example of that in one of the sections below. Okay, so now looking forward to that. So it's saying return the same input data. Here we are declaring a user in model, and it will contain a plain text password. So the import FastAPI, base model, and email str from Pydantic. Okay, first they have an instance of a FastAPI, then user in, which is the Pydantic base model, username a string required, password a string required, and email, its type is email str. We looked at this kind of inbuilt types from Pydantic, and this one, my guess is that it will perform proper email validation. Okay, like we know the format of an email and how it's supposed to look like. Then full name, a string or none, and it's optional. Okay, so it's saying don't do this in production. Okay, saying upload post. Okay, slash user, create user, input type is user, output is user. So you say returning the same input data. So same in, same out. But they're saying don't do this in production. Or rather say don't do it anywhere. To use email str, first install email validator. So they're saying make sure you create a virtual environment, activate it, then install it. For example, pip install email validator or pip install Pydantic email. Okay, interesting. So it can't just work on the fly. So since I'm learning, I don't need to add it now. I'll continue with this saying, and we are using this model to declare our input and the same model to declare our output. Okay, yeah, the same thing. To declare the input and declare the output. So this will be the request body. So they're saying now, whenever a browser is creating a user with a password, the API will return the same password in the response. In this case, it may not be a problem because it's the same user sending the password. But if we use the same model for another operation, we could be sending our user's password to every client. Yeah, true. This. So they're saying danger, never store the plain password of a user or send it in a response like this, unless you know all the caveats and you know what you're doing. Yeah, sometimes when you know what you're doing, you can, wow, you can mess up really bad. So the safest bet is never to use plain password. So even return a password in your response. They're saying add an output model. We can instead create an input model with the plain text password and an output model without it. Yeah, so they have two. This one is for the input, then this one would be for the output. Okay, so this have response model user out. This is for the output, this is for the input. I want to see how the documentation would look like, because usually the front-end developer would be looking at the same. So I just want to see how it would look like if I would have any battle having to explain. Okay, some parameters, request body, an example is this, response example is this. Yeah, so you see in the response there's no password, but the input has a password. That's good. I will continue. Of course, for the variants and versions from Python 3.8 and above, yeah, just check this. Concept is pretty much the same. What changes is the syntax. So, okay. So they're saying here, even though our path operation function is returning the same input user. Well, what's happening to my reading today? So it's saying here, even though our path operation function is returning the same input user that contains the password. Let us see. Okay. But it's not return but this one has no password. I don't know why they're saying it contains the password. user out, you see it's clean, there's no password. So they're saying we declared the response model to be our user out and doesn't include the password. Yes, exactly. I think the previous one up here is the one which had the password, this one. So if I'm to continue with this, where is this? Okay. Yeah, this is what they're going to explain. So let's continue. So they're saying, so FastAPI will take care of filtering out all the data that is not declared in the output model. And it does that using Pindatic. So they're saying response model or return type. In this case, because the two models are different, if we annotated the function return type as user out, the editor and tools would complain that we are returning an invalid type, as those are different classes. That is why in this example, we have to declare it in the response model parameter. But continue reading below to see how to overcome that. If I scroll up to see, they're saying if we annotated the function return type as user out, okay, the editor and tools will complain that we are returning an invalid type, as those are different cases. So you see they annotated it as any, okay? They did not annotate it as user out. So it's any, not user out. But for if you want validation or whatever, this is the solution using response model equals to your Pindatic model. And in this case is user out. Okay, so there's more text here to read. They're saying let's continue from the previous example. We wanted to annotate the function with one type. Okay, yes, that's correct. But we wanted to be able to return from the function something that actually includes more data. So they're saying we want FastAPI to keep filtering the data using the response model, so that even though the function returns more, the response will only include the fields declared in the response model. We want FastAPI to keep filtering the data using the response model, so that even though the function returns more data, the response will only include the fields declared. Okay, so you have a model, but your function could include extra information, and you want that same model. Okay, so in the previous example, because the classes were different, we had to use the response model parameter. But also that means we don't get the support from the editor and tools checking the function return type. Yeah, because we are using any. So this is the challenge. Because of any, we don't have editor support. We are bypassing it. But FastAPI will do validation using this. In addition to that, we want to send extra data. So that's what they're trying to explain, how to overcome that. So they're saying in both cases where we need to do something like this, we want the model to just filter or remove some of the data, as in this example. In those cases, we can use classes and inheritance to take advantage of function type annotations to get better support in the editor and tools, and still get the FastAPI data filtering. Yeah, so inheritance is becoming the solution to this. So let's continue. I want to see how they did it. Okay, they import FastAPI from FastAPI. They import base model and email str from Pindatic. Is an instance of FastAPI. Okay, base user, base model. Okay, having a username which is a string, email which is an email str, full name which is optional or can be a string. And then we have user input, user in, which is a base user. Okay, so having that, then password str. Let me first scroll up. So you're saying async def create user. Okay, so the user input class has only a password, but the output, wait, this is interesting. Let me first, I want to see this. I want to see how the documentation is going to look like. I want to see whether the request border with this, okay, and that are different. Refresh. So if I go back here, okay, and you see the input is user in this. I go back, request body, it's saying username, email, full name, password. Okay. Then the output, base user. Output this, okay, without the password. Okay, this makes sense. So you have a base user without the password, okay, but you have the user input, which has all this because of inheriting this plus the password. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I just wanted to see if actually the password would be added to all these others because of inheritance. Now it makes sense. All these added to this one because of inheritance. But of course, you leave out base user. Okay. And like they said, these are what? The extra fields. These other ones. I think it makes sense. And now the editor actually will give you support because of now this type, correct return type and correct this, without having to use this argument, this parameter, response underscore model. So I need to move on. So saying with this, we get tooling support, like I just said, from editors and MyPy, as this code is correct in terms of types. But we also get the data filtering from FastAPI. So saying, how does this work? Let's check that out. Type annotations and tooling. First, let's see how editors and MyPy and other tools would see this. Base user has the base fields. Okay, then user in inherits from base user and adds the password field. So it will include all the fields from both models. Like we have seen, we annotate the function return type as base user, but we are actually returning a user in instance. So return type is base user. Okay, but ideally it's a user in instance because of they share the still user information, but in this case without this is nice. If you look at this, what they're returning this. Okay, returning this. So you'd assume because they're running the same thing, user in having a password. Okay, you'd expect to get a password here, but because of base user not having a password, it will be eliminated, filtered out. Yeah, this is nice. I didn't actually understood that, but it's pretty cool. FastAPI data filtering. So you're saying now for FastAPI, it will see the return type and make sure that you return. Now for FastAPI, it will see that it will see the return type and make sure that what you return includes only the fields that are declared in the type. Exactly, just like this. We have your base user, okay? What is being returned is an instance of user in, the same user. So you expect this to be in this, but it's not there. They actually have only these attributes. So password is filtered out because of this. So FastAPI does several things internally with Pydantic to make sure that those same rules of class inheritance are not used for the returned data filtering. Otherwise, you'd end up returning much more data than what you expected. This way, you can get the best of both worlds: type annotations with tooling support and data filtering. Yeah, pretty nice. So the saying, see it in the docs. When you see the automatic docs, you can check the input model and output model will both have their own JSON. Yeah, and I think we have seen that already. Because of my curiosity, I went ahead and checked. The saying both models will be used for the interactive API documentation. Okay, if I come here and I maybe show you one more time, you can see the type for the request body, you can see the example value for the output in the successful response. There's no password. All right, so you're saying other return type annotations. So you're saying there might be cases where you return something that is not a valid pindatic field, and you annotate it in the function only to get the support providing. Let me read this again. There might be cases where you return something that is not a valid pindatic field, and you annotate it in the function only to get the support provided by the tooling, like your editor, MyPy, among others. Okay, let us see. It's saying return a response directly. The most common case would be returning a response directly, as explained later in the docs, in the advanced docs. Okay, no need to go there. So the Python 3.8 plus. So FastAPI response. This thing for FastAPI.responses, import JSON response, redirect response, an instance of FastAPI. So JSON response and redirect response are the first new things. Then you can see on the path operation function, teleport is a boolean, which is by default is false, and this makes it a query parameter. Okay, but the response is the response is this. Okay, let me go up here. So you're saying there might be cases where you return something that is not a valid pindatic field, and you annotate it in the function only to get support provided by the tooling. Oh yeah, now I understand it. So you just can use this generic. I think this is just generic. So we're returning a response. And the reason you're doing that is to bypass so that the editors and MyPy don't complain. Okay. So saying if teleport, you see they can have a redirect response. Otherwise, they return a JSON response. But why it passes that a redirect response and a JSON response are both responses. So let me just copy this. I want to check something. And paste. Okay, let's go to the browser. Okay, teleport. Okay, is a parameter. I told you it's a query parameter. And by now, of course, we know that the result is a string. Okay, this is good enough. If I get back here and I look at the implementation of JSON response, you see, JSON response inherits from response. If I look at the implementation of redirect response, that redirect response inherits from response. So redirect response and JSON response are both responses. So the editor, tooling like the editor and MyPy wouldn't complain about this. Yeah. And this is actually clear. Excuse me. So you're saying this simple case is handled automatically by FastAPI because the return type annotation is the class or a subclass of response. This simple case is handled automatically by FastAPI because the return type annotation is the class or subclass of response. Yeah, exactly. Like I've shown you that redirect response is a subclass of response and JSON response is a subclass of response. So the thing, and tools will also be happy because both of redirect response and JSON response are subclasses of response. So the type annotation is correct. Yeah, they're just emphasizing the point again. Okay, so they're saying annotate a response subclass. You can also use a subclass of response in the type annotation. So like redirect response is a subclass of response. So we can use redirect response or JSON response, or all both would work, just like here. Instead of response, I can say I want to return a JSON response. Okay, but of course this would fail. I mean, this one could fail because I would have maybe to get rid of this. Okay, because we're being specific to a JSON response. Then after that, we can also can be specific and say maybe it's going to be a redirect response only. And that means I would have to remove anything that deals with returning a JSON response. But I'll put back this. yeah, so just come here to show you this. Then after that, I would say this will also work because, yeah, this will also work because indirect redirect response is a subclass of response, and FastAPI will automatically handle this simple case. Okay, say invalid return type annotation. So the other ones we'll be looking at are for annotations which are valid and are very okay. So the thing, but when you return some other arbitrary object that is not a valid pandatic type, for example, a database object, and you annotate it like that in the function, FastAPI will try to create a pandatic response model from that type annotation and will fail. But when you return some other arbitrary object that is not a valid pandatic type, like a database object, you annotate it like that in the function, FastAPI will try to create a pandatic response from the model from that type annotation and will fail. Okay. The same would happen if you had something like a union between different types where one or more of them are not valid pandatic types. For example, this would fail. Okay, so we're saying a FastAPI response, redirect response imported. Okay, an instance of FastAPI. Then here they're saying response or dict. Okay. And this is a union between different types. Okay. Remember this symbol when we're learning about annotations. So you're trying to say this can either be a response or a diction, but these are different types. Okay. And dict is not a valid pandatic type. Okay. So let's say if teleport return redirect response, which is a response, otherwise return message. Okay, so they're saying this would actually fail. Okay. So what they're trying to say that pandatic, okay, FastAPI will try to create a pandatic response. Okay. From the type of this would cause the issue. If you read the statement, they say, and you annotate it like that in the function, FastAPI will try to create a pandatic response model from that type annotation and will fail. Okay, yeah, this is interesting. But my mind kind of tells me that this should have worked fine. Then I can continue. Says this fails because the type annotation is not a pandatic type and it's just a single response class or subclass. It's a union, any of the two between a response and a dict. Okay. So you're saying disable response model. Continuing from the example above, you might want to have the default validation documentation. You may not want to have the default validation, documentation, filtering, among others, that is performed by FastAPI, but you might want to still keep the return type annotation in the function to get support from tools like editors and type checkers, for example, MyPy. In this case, you can disable the response model generation by setting response underscore model equals to none. So yeah, it applies here. So I guess if I came here and I say response model equals to none, this should do it. I want to see the documentation. Okay. Yeah, and actually this section, see this section here, we don't get any information here. It's just empty. So I'll go back. So you're saying this will make FastAPI skip the response model generation, and that way you can have any return type annotations you need without affecting your FastAPI application. Okay, but yeah, I guess you don't want to have that. So you're saying response model encoding parameters. Your response model could have default values like, okay, so we have this one, making it optional, this one 10.5, this one a list, and we have seen this, okay. Then they have here, they're having an item dictionary, which is a dictionary of dictionaries. Then we see that the response model is the item, okay, which is this. And the response, the same response model exclude and set equals to true. Okay, they need to explain this. Okay, this we know that we're giving it a default value of none, but in other versions of Python, you have to use union. Okay, but this is the same thing. So default this they explain that the tags will have a default value of 10, tags will have an a default empty list. So they're saying, but you might want to omit them from the result if they were not actually stored. So they're saying, for example, if you have models with many optional attributes in a NoSQL database, but you want to send very long JSON responses full of, you have many optional attributes, okay? But you want to send very long JSON responses full of default values. They're saying use the response exclude and set parameter. So they're saying you can set the path operation decorator parameter response model exclude and set equals to true. So they're saying, and those default values won't be included in the response. Only the values actually set. So they're saying if you send a request to a path operation for the item ID foo, the response, not including the default values, will be this. Okay. Let me check. Let me find out. Okay. So I'll go to the documentation, refresh. Okay. But in the example, I see the default values. Maybe this only works in practice. Let us try it out. Item ID that, execute, get an internal server error. What's the error? Oh, the key. We have to actually return a key. So I'll use foo. Okay. I'll use foo string. Wow. Actually, I should have seen this here. It's a string. It's a path variable. So execute. Yeah, it works. You see, we have name and price. But the default values, if you go up here, default values of tax being 10.0, it's not there. But if I remove this, I should have the default values. So I'll save, refresh. I didn't even need to refresh. Try it out. Go with foo, lowercase, execute. You see, yeah, now we get those default values for price, for tax, for the description, and for the tags. So if I Ctrl Z here and save, come execute again. I guess I'm just enjoying this. Yeah, so you see, they have been eliminated. Okay, so saying info, saying in Pydantic version 1, the method was called to dict. It was deprecated but still supported in Pydantic version 2 and renamed to model underscore dump. Okay, so in the examples here use dict method for compatibility with version 1, but you should use model dump instead if you can use Pydantic. Pydantic version 2 makes sense. So saying FastAPI uses Pydantic models dict with its exclude and set parameters to achieve this. Yeah, so that's okay. Good to know. So saying you can also use response model exclude default equals to true. You can use response model exclude none equals to true, as described in the Pindatics docs for exclude defaults and exclude none. Okay, so this one excludes the default values. This one excludes none. Good to know. But I guess I know you may be wondering, how can you remember all this? I think it's actually impossible to remember all this. So I think what can really happen is probably, yeah, looking this up. Actually, if possible, I want to find a way of how I'm going to use AI to get chunks of this documentation, probably. Whereby when I'm asking an ALM to remind me about something, it doesn't ask me something random from anywhere, but asks me exactly what is inside here, or finds out what is exactly inside here. So they're saying data with values for fields with defaults. If your data has values for the models fields with default values, like item with ID bar, okay? If your data has values for the models fields, okay, so I think this is the data that you're sending, okay? Of course, they'll be included in the response. They're saying data with the same values as the defaults. If the data has the same values as the defaults, like the item bars, yeah, they will be added still. So ideally, as long as you add the data in your request as you're sending the request, it's added. Otherwise, it will be excluded. They're saying FastAPI is smart enough. Actually, Pandatic is smart enough to realize that even though description tags and tags have the same values as the default, they were set explicitly instead of taken from the default. Yeah, so the point is, as long as you set the information explicitly, it will show up. For example, I can copy this. If I copy this, okay, and come here, you see when we executed this, we got nothing. Okay, I mean we got only two values and the defaults were excluded. Where can I put the okay, they're using Carl. Wow. I wanted to be able to send the request, but I'll leave that for now. Okay, can this be edited? I think this is for copying probably. But yeah, we get the point. So they're saying, so they will be included in the JSON response. Notice that the default values can be anything, not only none. They can be a list, a float, or 10.5 etc. Wow, I'm feeling tired today. It's been a long one. I think because I had a lot to do today. So it's saying response model and response model exclude, response model include, and response model exclude. You can also use the path operation decorators, response model include and response model exclude. They take a set of a string with this name of the attributes to include, omitting the rest or excluding the rest. Yeah, so you can either include or exclude something from the response model. This can be used as a quick shortcut if you have only one Pandatic model and you want to remove some data from the output. So there are two ways actually. Like what we saw that side at the beginning, you can define a different Pandatic model for the input and for the output, or you can use this to exclude. They're saying, but it is still recommended to use the ideas above using multiple classes instead of using these parameters. Yeah, like I just mentioned with the other types, it is better to use multiple classes. They're saying this is because the JSON schema generated in your app's open API. This is because the JSON schema generated in your app's API and the docs will still be the one for the complete model. I want to read this again. Wow, sorry, I have a distraction here. Let me just mute notifications. This is because it's funny how a simple notification can throw off your mind. They're saying this is because the JSON schema generated in your app's open API and the docs will still be the one for the complete model, even if you use response model include or response model exclude to omit some attributes. This also applies to response model by alias that works similarly. Okay, so I think this is for aliases. Let me see. Okay. This is better. It's a nice tip. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just putting it in my mind. If I want to exclude something from the parameter, whether maybe if I mean from the response, simple, I just use a different class. Okay. Like they showed earlier. Different class for the input, different class for the output. And in case I want maybe to use the same instance, I use inheritance, like the example we saw earlier. So, okay. Yeah, so this is the example they're giving. That response model include. So you see response model is item, but response model include name, description. Okay. Then here you're saying response model exclude tax. Okay. So they're only including these two, they're excluding this one. Okay. Again, let us check and see what they say. Okay. So we're going to check for this one, get items. Go to the docs, refresh. I come here, I try it out. Item ID, I put bar, execute. See, responsibility include name, description. I can only send name. If I remove description, okay, and save, get back here, execute, you see, I get only the name. Okay, Control Z to put back the description. Then we have to test this one here, exclude tax. Okay, so we want the tax to be excluded. So we come here, close this one, open this one, item ID, say try it out. Item ID is foo, execute. You see, we have everything except tax. So I want to, yeah, accept tax. But I want to do something like this, okay? Foo does not have tax. I want to try bar. Bar, say bar, execute. You see, yeah, eliminated. If I remove this, okay, and save, and come and execute, tax now appears. Pretty good, okay? But like they say, it's better to use what? Separate classes instead of doing this. You better have a class here, okay? Saying maybe the return type is maybe item, something like that. But if I do this, let me see what happens. Does it change anything? Execute. It doesn't. Yeah, this is me trying and erroring things live. So I'll go again. Yeah, I think I've done with this. So you have a tip here saying the syntax name description creates a set with two values. Okay, yeah, that's a set. I should be I thought about it keenly, but it's actually set. Thank you for the tip. It is equivalent to set. Yeah, name description. This is correct. So they're saying using lists instead of sets. If you forget to use a set and use a list or tuple instead, FastAPI will still convert it to a set and it will work correctly. Okay, that's good to know. And here they're simply using a list, and here they're using a list. I don't have to try this out. Or maybe since we've reached the end, I can, just to prove a point. And to cure my curiosity. Refresh, come here, try it out, put bar, execute. Okay, internal server error, that's okay. If I put bar, but the lowercase, and execute, I get this. Okay, yeah. So this okay. So they have a recap saying use the path operation decorators parameter response model to define response models, and especially to ensure private data is filled out. Use the path operations decode it as response model. To define response models, we have seen that, okay? Just like this. So this is what they mean by that statement. And especially to ensure private data is filtered out. They're saying use response model, exclude and set to return only the values explicitly set. Okay. So meaning if there are any default values and you have this equals to true, it will leave out defaults. Exclude unset. So unset meaning something you've not explicitly set, but is a default value. For example, like this. Okay, if I don't send the tax in the request, and someone has not explicitly set it, maybe to be maybe like 5.0, it will be excluded. Wow, this has been a really long one, almost an hour. So yeah, tomorrow I'll go into some other topic. Yeah, this one looks really short. It's about extra models. After extra models, what's next? The status code. Yeah, pretty common question by the interview. Those who have done backend interview questions, this is a very common question. Then yeah, baby steps. Can't believe I've come a long way studying all this. Who knows what I'll be doing very soon. Can't wait. Can't wait. All right. So yeah, I guess this is it. I need to call it a day and rest. Let's meet tomorrow.